Yeah.
Welcome, everybody, to our mental health night for Never Alone with our targeted topic tonight of eating disorders, breaking the silence. Really pleased to be able to have a wonderful individual come and speak with us tonight on her expertise. Her name is Angela Jahn. She's a chaplain at Rogers Behavioral Health Facility in Oconomowoc, where she provides spiritual care to patients in the eating disorder units. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Religious Studies and a master's degree in theology from Talbot School of Theology in California. Angela is deeply committed to supporting individuals from diverse culture and religious backgrounds, and she has a strong passion for walking alongside those navigating mental health challenges. Let's give a warm welcome to Angela.
Thank you, Lori. Like Lori mentioned, my name is Angela, and I am very excited to be with you guys tonight. So, I have a presentation prepared, and I'd very much love for this to be a conversation. So, I will be asking for feedback and for your just participation, and also would welcome any questions as we go. So, um, we'll get started. This presentation I titled Eating Disorders About More Than Food. And you might be wondering what a chaplain is doing presenting this topic. But I was very excited to have an opportunity to talk about eating disorders and the work that I get to do at Rogers. I am the dedicated chaplain for all of the eating disorder units. So I have been immersing myself in just the world of recovery. And we have inpatient units and residential units, as well as other forms of treatment. And so I get to journey alongside these individuals as they heal and watch how their spirituality and religious beliefs get to be a part of the healing journey. So I'm going to weave a little bit of the spiritual piece in just because that's my lane. And just know that the content regarding eating disorders was given to me and prepared by the medical staff, the psychiatrists, the directors of medical care over the eating disorder program. So I'm bringing you information from Rogers. I want to hear your feedback before we dive in. What do you think an eating disorder is? When you think about an eating disorder, what comes to your mind? Anorexia, bulimia. Mhm. Emotional eating. Yeah, like stress eating. Yes, imbalance, disordered eating. Absolutely. So, this is the executive clinical director of Rogers Eating Disorder Services. Her name is Nicole, and she helped me prepare this presentation. So, I really appreciated this quote when I was talking to her. She said, at their core, eating disorders are disrupted patterns of eating behaviors that lead to significant emotional distress, negatively impact physical health, or interfere in daily life. And I appreciate that disrupted patterns of eating behaviors. And so that can look a lot of different ways. And we will go deeper into the different kinds that you brought up here in a moment. Also wanted to mention, so this is a quote from a therapist in the eating disorder unit at Rogers in Tampa, Florida, because Rogers has units all over the US. Rachel says, when people think of eating disorders, they think weight. Eating disorders are first and foremost a mental illness, which manifests in physical symptoms. It really is about the relationship people have with food, not so much what their outside appearance is. And so as I walk on the units, that are my eating disorder units, I see all sorts of different types of people. People that look very, very skinny, and people that look totally normal, sort of what you'd think about as like a normal, healthy body weight, and people who are overweight to varying degrees. I see men and women and all sorts of different kinds of people, young people, old people. So any type of person that you would see at a mall, for example, or at the airport or at Walmart when you're people watching, would be like the people that I would see on those units. Okay? So you can't tell necessarily if someone has an eating disorder just by how they look. So this is a little bit more of like the clinical definition. So eating disorders are characterized by a consistent disruption of normal eating behavior that results in all sorts of different problems, physically, physiologically, socially, spiritually. And these disorders affect nearly every area and system of the body, including the heart, bones, and kidneys. Eating disorders can also make other medical conditions worse. And without proper treatment, eating disorders are life-threatening. Like they don't go away on their own. They're sort of like an addiction, substance use. You need treatment. And what happens, this is really, this is interesting. So when someone, especially someone who has anorexia and is not eating, eventually their body starts burning muscle, and it will eat the muscle, and it will eventually eat their heart, the muscle, right? So that's why eating disorders are very serious, because if someone is choosing not to eat, um, or getting the proper nutrition, their whole body can shut down. So this is definitely a mental illness that is very dangerous and complicated to treat. So there's several different types of eating disorders, which we'll talk about. And they each have different symptoms depending on the type. So as we kind of dig in, like the popular ones, which, you know, we kind of already surfaced, was anorexia and bulimia, but there's some other ones that maybe you haven't ever heard about. So we'll kind of take a look at anorexia first, which is the most common, I would say. Um, so this often starts in the early or mid adolescence of someone's life, but it can occur at any age. It's very common in children. We have a child and adolescent unit with kids, gosh, as young as, let's say, like 8. So it's common to think about people having like body image concerns or dieting. But this is more than just body image issues and dieting. So anorexia is when behaviors and worries about food become so overwhelming that the person begins to use extreme dieting techniques to lose weight. And people aren't necessarily underweight when they have anorexia. They can be any weight. All right, so some kind of signs or behaviors are dramatic weight loss. Often when this begins for someone, you'll see an extreme loss of weight. And there's a lot of medical conditions where people lose weight. So it's not always anorexia, but anorexia, there will be a rapid, like a very stark noticing. They'll begin to dress in layers to hide the weight loss or stay warm. They're very preoccupied with weight, food, calories, fat grams, and dieting. They're refusing to eat certain foods. restricting, and they make frequent comments about feeling fat or overweight. And so you can see that there's a distortion that's forming in the way that they begin to look versus how they see themselves. Any questions so far? All right. Has anyone heard of? Oh, yeah. Do you want me to go back? Yeah. Yes. It's a really good question. And there is a slide a little bit later on where we're going to talk about that. But to answer your question, just at a high level right now, there isn't necessarily like one test, like pee in a cup, and we'll be able to tell you if you're anorexic. But there are a bunch of different physical measuring points. And so it is through testing the body to be able to see like what's going on there. But it's also a question, an assessment that's done by a doctor. And yes, genetics isn't definitely a factor. There is both like biological and physiological reasons as well as external reasons, but it's complicated. It's like alcoholism. There's not necessarily like uh, you know a perfect way to determine if someone is going to be anorexic or not, right? It's not like some people believe that it's like, oh, it's the parents' fault. Like they have a bad relationship with food and it just got passed down to their child. That's not what happens. So there is biological things that are going on as well as external things. So yeah, good question. We'll talk more about that. So there is a diagnosis that was just added by the American Psychiatric Association in 2013. This is called the Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, ARFID. Has anybody heard that acronym? So this is what maybe people think about when they think about picky eaters, okay? So people with fussy eating. Research suggests that people with ARFID have biological traits that put them at risk for avoiding certain foods. And for a child with ARFID, their selective eating behaviors may continue into adulthood. Just because someone is a picky eater doesn't mean they have this, okay? So this is beyond just being picky and not liking the texture of certain foods. I met with a young man on the residential eating disorder who had a really traumatic experience with choking. And that led to him being so afraid to eat. And so that fear led him to not be able to eat or only eat certain foods or liquids. But that began to be life-threatening for him. And so he was on an ICU hospital dying because his body did not have the nutrients in the food that it needed. And so this disorder is complex, and it's not just about not wanting to eat certain things. There's reasons why there's fear and anxiety um, and avoidant tendencies. Okay. I've also seen this where people begin to have safe foods where they'll only eat certain things. They might only eat string cheese, uh, cereal, and yeah, like grapes. Only, only. And if those aren't available, they're not eating. So what happens when they're on an airplane? What happens when they're at a friend's house? So there are different ways that this shows up. And so it is not as simple as just like eat your vegetables. Oh, I don't want to eat them. It begins to grow into uh, an avoidance that is not able to be controlled. Okay, binge eating disorder is another eating disorder diagnosis, and this one was also added in 2013. So we're seeing a rise of people who are eating large amounts of food than what would typically be eaten in a short amount of time. Um, and in order to be diagnosed with this, you are binge eating at least 1 day a week like this for 3 consecutive months. So this isn't necessarily something that someone does every single day. Um, I had someone in my family who um, would binge eat at night, and she would go down to the refrigerator and just clean it out. And in the morning, it would be empty, and people would wonder like what's going on. And it was a huge like thing where she felt shame, and of course she didn't want to be like I ate all the food. But it's complicated, and people don't always understand why they do it. But it's this huge binge that is not something that you and I, it's not just like I overate for Thanksgiving, right? This is consuming a large amount of food and doing it on a regular basis. Um, so often hiding food, disappearing food, uh, not wanting to eat around other people, stealing or hoarding food are some kind of signs and things to that maybe you would observe if this was a family member or a friend. Okay, bulimia. So this is when there is not just the binging, so eating large amounts, but purging, so throwing up, making themselves throw up in order to prevent weight gain. And so there's a number of different ways that the purging can happen. Oftentimes it's throwing up. And as I've spoken with patients and residents who are recovering from bulimia, I'm learning just about how violent it is for their bodies when they're attempting to throw up, and especially when their body doesn't have anything else to throw up. So it's gruesome and very destructive for a person's body. Some people take laxatives or diuretics. Some people fast or are exercising so much. And so you can notice this when people are eating and then they disappear. So on the units after meals and snacks, their bedroom doors, the bathrooms are locked. And so there's a certain amount of time that the body needs to kind of digest the food. And so people can keep the food in them. Um, Skipping meals is another sign, developing food rituals, uh, which would mean like I can only have I can only have something to eat after I've exercised 2 hours. So a food ritual would be some sort of rule that they've created to make it okay to eat, or eating certain amounts of things at certain times. Drinking excessive amounts of water or like non-caloric beverages. Um, People who have eating disorders get really good at counting calories and fat grams and carbs and proteins and all those kind of things, and they know exactly what they need to do in order to maintain the weight they want to be at. So people with eating disorders are actually very bright when it comes to how they are adapting and holding on to what they're doing. So there are other disorders like purging disorder, which isn't necessarily about binging just, but like restricting and somehow getting the food out in some way. Night eating syndrome, Orthorexia. Does anybody know what that is? So this is when people restrict their food intake based on how healthy they think the food is. So this would be like someone who only eats like whole foods or clean foods or only eats like as healthy as they possibly can. They would never put McDonald's in their body or something like that. So very hyperfixated on what they're putting in their body. So they might eat 3 meals a day and have many snacks. It's not about not eating, but it's about only eating certain foods that are healthy, right? What about body dysmorphic disorder? Does anyone know what that is? Yes. And this isn't just an eating disorder related diagnosis. This is like a very real um, like diagnosis in like the medical realm. So this isn't just mental illness, eating disorder. Someone can have a body dysmorphic disorder and not necessarily have any food issues. Okay. But when they look in the mirror, when they look at pictures, when they look at themselves, they see something totally different than what other people see. Yeah. And it can be especially awful when there's also food issues involved. Muscle dysmorphia is a specific form of dysmorphic disorder that focuses on body build. So right now I have someone on my recovery unit who is a firefighter, paramedic, um, very fit, in shape, um, but taking stimulants so they can work all day or all night on their 12 or 24-hour shift, and then take stimulants so they can go to the gym for 3 hours and then do whatever they need and sleep maybe 1 or 2 hours a day. And so this is, coming out of the desire to want to have a certain kind of physique and will do whatever they need to do it. Um, all right. There's relative energy deficiency in a sport, which the acronym is REDS, describes a set of symptoms when someone burns more calories than they take in. Often this can be with athletes who just cannot physically eat enough food, right? They're burning so many calories, but their lifestyle, they're not able to maintain the body weight. And so there needs to be changes. But if they're not willing to make changes, right, and they're still, involved in a sport or something that is just making it hard for them to get enough food, they're going to keep losing weight until they're not able to do their sport anymore. Okay, so the exact cause is not fully understood. Um, but there is a lot of research that suggests that there's a number of factors, genetic, biological, behavior, psychological, and social functions, factors that can raise a person's risk for developing an eating disorder. Um, Oftentimes, adults who come forward for treatment who haven't been treated before have been struggling with an eating disorder for a long time. So it's more likely that the eating disorder developed when they were younger and they didn't quite understand what that was, right? Um, but food has taken over their life in a sense that like every thought is consumed with food or exercise, their next meal, how they're going to get rid of the calories, whatever it is. Um, so yeah, I have like older women on my units who have come in and said, I just finally have gotten the courage up to ask for help. I've been struggling with this for, 40 years or more. This is really interesting to me. So Eating disorders are often maladaptive coping mechanisms, which means they're unhealthy ways of coping that center around regulating their mood. So this is Rachel, again, one of the therapists at Rogers in Tampa. She says, typically people overeat or undereat because they're trying to manage underlying anxiety or depression. And they want to feel like they have some semblance of control. So often when things are out of control in someone's life, they're going to turn to the things that they do have control over. And as human beings, we have to eat every day. We don't get a choice, right? Like our bodies won't work for much longer if we don't eat every day, right? So by using food as a way to gain control, might start out as sort of a innocent thing, but then becomes completely unmanageable. They're not able to stop. Okay, so these are some symptoms, which can vary, obviously, by the type of eating disorder person. But just in general, there is a preoccupation with weight or body shape. Okay? Someone is avoiding eating certain foods, oftentimes because they're afraid of either they'll choke, gain weight, whatever the reason, but there's fear involved. There's feelings of being out of control over the amount of food eaten. And if this is more than one time a week, that this is a sign of an eating disorder. Worrying about the nutritional content of foods, feeling intensely disgusted or anxious when looking at their body, avoiding eating for a number of reasons, feeling guilty after eating, especially after eating very large amounts. If someone is intentionally making themselves vomit or exercise to prevent weight gain, consistently anxious when eating foods or drinking liquids, feeling the need to check the appearance of their body or looking in a mirror throughout the day. On the eating disorder units, if someone is there because they want to get help and they're all there voluntarily, there is like movement restrictions. So they're not allowed to exercise or even go on walks until they're stable enough. And there's many people that have feeding tubes and are carrying around their little liquid bag of, supplements that are feeding them because they physically won't eat. I had a young girl on my child and adolescent eating disorder unit that didn't eat for 21 days while she was on the unit, and she hadn't eaten before then. And so Rogers, she was willingly allowed a feeding tube, but she did not drink or eat for 21 days at the hospital. And I mean, she was dizzy. She could barely walk. She was on bed rest, right? Like you can't function when you're like that. So the treatment is long and extensive because someone doesn't just wake up and decide to start eating. That's not how it works. So it takes a while. So who's at risk for eating disorders? Basically, anybody can have an eating disorder, just like anybody can have any sort of mental health illness. There's some that are more genetic than others. But 30 million Americans suffer from eating disorders. And 20 to 30% of those are male, which is believed to be underreported. But I see little boys and little girls, old men, old women on my units, and everything in between. So often, like I mentioned, this is mostly diagnosed between the ages of 12 and 26. And I think it's because parents are watching their children and concerned. And so um, they're catching it. And these are patterns too that have been going on for a while. 13% of women over 50 engage in eating disorder behaviors. And there is a higher likelihood for the LGBTQ plus community compared to like cisgender heterosexual individuals. And I'm not sure why. I know Rogers has a research department that we are so fortunate because they're committed to reducing the stigma of mental health. And they want to do more research in the field to be able to find new ways to treat things, to be more effective, to find out the causes. So there is a really interesting study that's going on right now that um, looking at like what sort of biological markers, like how can we tell genetically that someone would be predisposed to an eating disorder or other mental health illnesses. So like it's neat to be a part of an organization that is trying to do just cutting edge things in the field. Yeah. And then I mentioned this before, but an eating disorder is not a choice. Um, and people can recover completely. This is a difficult one for people to recover from, but it absolutely can be treated and recovered from, which is amazing. So, this is a quote from Dr. Brad Smith, medical director and eating disorder psychiatrist at Rogers. He said, "I haven't met anyone who woke up and decided they were going to have an eating disorder. People begin with a behavior that was well intended, right, to maybe minimize anxiety, but it can get away from them. And it may have even started out as healthy. And at some point, they started to do behavior more excessively and they no longer have control of it." Does that sound like something that you have heard of? I mean, other sort of addictions? Yeah.
Seems to be a natural psychological reaction to something
Yes.
that spin the wheel of addiction or response, and that's what you do. That's what probably why it's so hard to figure out the markers of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as you were reading that, you pretty much insert anything you want, right?
Yes. That is how our human psyche works, right? That's the way we're created. We're creatures of habit. We love our habits and that balance, even when it's not healthy for us, right? We start doing something, it works for a minute, and something in our brain is like, that works, that works, that works. And then we keep doing it, doing it, doing it until it doesn't work anymore. And then we can't stop. So I have so many patients who talk to me about how their eating disorder feels like an addiction. Like, even if they wanted to, they can't stop. And so that's why treatment is necessary. It doesn't go away on its own. This is interesting to me too. So obviously there's very real physical effects of an eating disorder. I mean, the people on the units are getting blood drawn all the time, getting their vitals taken, they're being watched very carefully. But it also affects self-esteem, body image issues, right? Even if someone before they were diagnosed with an eating disorder had self-esteem and body image issues, afterwards, for sure, these are going to be even exacerbated. Relationship issues. Because something that we are going through doesn't just impact us in a little bubble, it affects people around us, right? If we're disappearing anytime someone mentions food, we're not showing up for family parties and functions or holidays, right? Like it's going to impact our relationships. My patients don't like to go out to eat. Or if there is a meal coming up, they're feeling so anxious they can't even function. So this undoubtedly is going to affect relationships. Their enthusiasm for life decreases. There's so many that are struggling with suicidal ideation and may have attempted suicide. Their thought life is consumed with eating disorder related thoughts, behaviors. They withdraw from loved ones and cherished experiences. They experience significant loss because of this. Can you imagine loss of relationships, things that matter to them? Their eating disorder sort of fills the main space in their mind, their heart, their soul. And they often have very real and painful spiritual struggles. And you can imagine why, seeing these like painful emotions on the side: shame, guilt, disgust, fear, anxiety, worry, grief. Those are awful for anyone to experience. And then to have an illness, it's hard. It's really hard. It's overwhelming. So on another slide, it mentioned that oftentimes an eating disorder will also be paired with another sort of mental illness of some sort. So eating disorders and their friends, oftentimes they'll have a diagnosis of depression, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, uh, anxiety, panic, PTSD, substance use. And at Rogers, in the philosophy at Rogers, is that it's almost always best to try to treat whatever's going on at the same time. Because if one is treated, often the other one will start getting worse, or that behavior will pop up in another area. So if people can be having treatment that is also targeting their substance use or their anxiety or depression, it's going to help them with the healing and recovery process. Does that make sense? Okay, I liked this quote. So, eating disorders eventually kind of make the life of someone smaller and smaller and smaller. It robs people of their families, friends, their interests, and values. So if you were to imagine yourself consumed with something day and night, right? No relief. Um, it does make your world really small. It's hard to enjoy the good things. It's hard to be grateful. It's hard to laugh and have fun and want to plan when you're completely overwhelmed with what you're going to eat next. Okay, so these are things that I see all the time on the eating disorder units. People have unresolved grief and trauma. They are bitter and angry. They have not been able to forgive themselves or others in their life. They're deeply angry at themselves. How did I get here? Maybe others, and even God. They have difficulty trusting or even trusting themselves. I mean, they've betrayed their own body in so many ways with what maybe started out as a way to cope with something really hard. They have questions and confusion about their identity and their self-worth. I have so many people who talk about just the self-hatred that they have, and that's rooted in guilt and shame. And then that leads to self-harm. It's just this cycle. Helplessness, powerlessness, lack of control, hopelessness, significant questions about purpose and meaning in their life. They have trouble making sense of what's going on in their life in light of their spiritual or religious beliefs. maybe they were taught something younger about God or what life is supposed to be like, or that like popular common philosophy, like if I'm a good person, nothing bad will happen to me. And all of that comes crashing down when someone is in the midst of a life-threatening eating disorder. How do you make sense of that? Where is God in all of that? How is their learned theology aligning with their experiential theology, what they're actually going through? And how do they make sense of that? So there's a lot of struggles that need to be sorted out. It's not just about changing their relationship with food and their body. Because there's not a pill for an eating disorder, right? You can't just take a pill and be better. It's behavioral recovery and therapy. So, getting to what does help, cognitive behavioral therapy, with an emphasis on exposure therapy. This is really interesting. So, CBT, does anybody familiar with CBT? No, that is I know what you're talking about, but yeah. Yeah. So CBT is like a learning based treatment, focusing on what you believe and how you think and what you do. So it's that belief, um, behavior, thought, like relationship. So our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors all work together. So by changing harmful and negative thought patterns to be more helpful and positive, emotions begin to change, behaviors begin to change. The exposure therapy is really interesting. So patients will take certain things that cause them fear. Like, for example, that patient who had a traumatic experience with choking, his exposures were starting to eat solid foods. And so he would, like, exposures are kind of like experiments in the sense where someone picks something that is really scary for them, and they might start by looking at food, looking at a certain thing, like let's say carrots. And then they're noting how they feel, and they're sitting with that feeling. And then the next exposure might be the next day where they come back and they like will sniff the carrot and lick the carrot, right? Not eat the carrot yet, but they're working up to that, and they're noticing in their body how that feels. They're getting support until finally they are able to take one tiny bite of the carrot, right? Noticing how they feel. So there's different exposures of things that are specific to that person and what they're afraid of doing. Sometimes it's for someone with anorexia who's used to covering and kind of hiding under clothing, it might be wearing a t-shirt is one of their exposures, and seeing how they feel walking around in that t-shirt all day without a sweatshirt on or a robe. Um, so it's kind of actually behaving in such a way, but working up to that. So they start with the ones that cause them the least amount of anxiety first, and work themselves up to the things that are more challenging. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is very effective. It's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it is helping patients learn to accept uncomfortable or opposing thoughts and emotions while realizing they have room for change. So there's a lot of different activities like mindfulness, learning to be present in your body, sort of redeveloping that relationship with your body, listening to your body. Learning to hold distress and being more tolerant of distressing emotions. Learning how to emotionally regulate yourself, cope, self soothe. So there's a lot of things that go into the treatment. And at Rogers, we have inpatient, like I mentioned, where they're on a unit that they like can't leave, right? Um, Then they can step down to residential care where they're like living in a community with other people, like having treatment all day. Uh, and that would be like in a house setting, like maybe what you think of as like a group home or nursing home or something like that. And yeah, they're living together and they're recovering together. Then there's a step down from that where they can be going to like get treatment during the day and then they go home at night. So that would be a partial hospitalization. Um, Outpatient, that would maybe be like therapy um, or other kind of things that would be maybe they're working during the day but doing some stuff at night. So, spiritual care at Rogers. And I know 7:14, so I'm going to try to move through this a little bit quickly, but feel free to keep interjecting and asking questions. We really try at Rogers with our clinical staff chaplains to invite curiosity and explore sacred possibilities with our patients and residents. So we are meeting patients and residents where they're at, supporting them with what's important to them, and hopefully in our own creative ways, inspiring hope. So I want you to think about what spirituality means to you. Like if you had to like define it or put it into words, what comes to mind when you think about spirituality? God. Yeah. So kind of associating with some religious stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's a very large definition in today's dictionary.
Yeah.
So, I mean, personally, like, I don't know where you're going with it.
Yeah, well, here I am. Here I'm going with it. Because the patients that come to Rogers are not necessarily all religious or even Christian, right? They are coming from a lot of different backgrounds and there are many places on their spiritual journey. Some of them have had significant religious trauma. For some of them, even hearing the word religion or God would be distressing. And so the role of the chaplain at Rogers is to connect with patients and to get to know what they hold as sacred. And so this is a definition from this book here, which is called Working with Spiritual Struggles in Psychotherapy. But you bring up a good point. The definition of spirituality is not agreed upon. Like there are so many different ways to describe spirituality. But I like this definition because it sort of encompasses what me and the other chaplains are encountering when we are talking with a patient or resident about spiritual care. So, spirituality is a dynamic and intrinsic aspect of humanity through which persons seek ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and experience relationship to self, family, others, community, society, nature, and the significant or the sacred, whether you call that God, higher power, or whatnot. What jumped out at you in this? No mention of Jesus, right?
Well, I mean, it's what you.
Mentioning the one true God that we should be turning to.
Anyone else have any thoughts about this definition? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
Significant or sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Our God is sacred.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as, I mean, if you're involved in biblical principles, what I'm seeing, there is that, if you're using this approach, it's much more generic and non-offensive so that you're able to develop the most important part, which is relationship believe scripturally, the Bible actually said it. It's kind of like a mission statement without any Bible in it, kind of thing. You know, but I mean, the whole thing, the biblical principle of scripture, healing, mental health, is all developed around relationship. It started with God and Adam, showed with Christ, and in the early church. So it's through relationship. And the old saying that people don't care about what you know until they know you care. And then through that, those specific things can evolve or change by being revealed truths or explained things that maybe they had a misinterpretation of that fed into their mental trauma that created the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because personally, when I hear things like eating disorders, this, that, the other, they're so similar. You know what I mean? And the thing of it is, if you go back to it, they're the results. They're not the real issue. The real issue is the hurt or the trauma or the misunderstanding of life,
Right.
or their hurt, their habits, their hands. And the brain just is doing what the brain does in those situations. And I've practiced over for a long period of time to create these patterns that ultimately end up being destructive.
Yeah.
So that's my best way of taking that and tying it into biblical principles.
Thank you. I think that is really important. And I love that you could articulate that for us. And, you know, we all come to the table with our own ways that we're making sense of mental illness and what's happening. And the people that we're working with have their own also ideas of what's happening and how to find healing or what matters to them. But you're absolutely right in that we're starting with that relationship. And, you know, when they're coming to Rogers, everybody gets the opportunity to meet with a chaplain if they want. They have the choice, or attend a spirituality group if there's one on their unit. Or maybe they're, you know, kind of been there for a little while and they started seeing the chaplain around and maybe hearing something about so-and-so met with the chaplain and had a good experience, and they can start requesting. But it's interesting for me what I encounter when I meet with someone is that they want to talk about not necessarily why they're in the hospital and about their eating disorder, but about the trauma, the loss, the grief, the thing that's keeping them stuck. And so we get the unique opportunity to get to spend time with someone to hold them in this place where they're at, the struggle, and to help them untangle a little bit of what's going on for them, and to be able to support them in how they want to be supported. And often it's just with a conversation, you know, feeling heard. The medical system we know is not perfect. There's a lot of brokenness within healthcare. Um, but I think us as chaplains, we get the unique role to get to have the time to sit down with someone and really listen. And so it is about building that relationship, earning their trust, and getting to support them and empower them toward wellness and good things and that shalom, that balance, that harmony that you know everybody's seeking.
But they need to know where to continue that
Mhm.
after they leave the hospital.
Yes.
Because if they don't have something like a Celebrate Recovery or
Right.
some group that is going to help them
Mhm.
figure out where they can go to, what they can look up, what their tools are to help them get out of those situations if they're finding themselves back into it.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
because you always got to treat the physical need first,
Mhm.
and then you can treat
Yeah.
the God need after that.
Yeah. But you bring up a good point, that support system and that community that we're designed to need in order to heal and
Oh,
grow.
yeah,
Yes.
God, we were made for community.
Yes.
We were made for relationship.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and that's what's going to keep us on a straight path.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I think about that saying in recovery that says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And that community, that connection piece is so important to healing and to maintaining recovery. Yeah. Okay, so this is interesting. There's a lot more people now that are identifying themselves as maybe spiritual, but not religious. And that can mean that they are Christian and believe in Jesus, but they don't want to associate with organized religion.
More often than not.
Yes.
Spiritual means they're off in la la land somewhere with something that isn't.
Well, sometimes, but the people that I'm encountering at the hospital,
Yeah,
are searching for something.
okay.
And some of them believe in God, in Jesus, but some of them don't, but consider themselves
Right. No,
spiritual.
I understand, but the spiritual is not, they really don't believe in something, I don't think.
Well,
From what I've encountered with people who claim that they're spiritual.
right. But what they're believing in is real for them. And so as we encounter them, we believe what's important to them and learn about that. And so I totally understand there's a Christian worldview and way of looking at things. Um, from the chaplain perspective at Rogers, we want to show the person that we're meeting with that we respect them and that we want them to have their autonomy in what they're believing and trusting that they're on the path that ultimately
Right.
they need to be on. And so we get to be one part of that piece of their journey, that puzzle that can lead them to wherever they're going. And so some of these people believe in God, feel connected to nature, are describing themselves as spiritual. And so many of these people are wanting to talk with a chaplain, which I think is really cool. So we get the opportunity to kind of start meeting with people who are searching for something. Yeah.
So just an interesting question. With that last statistic you had up there.
Yep.
Yeah, I've actually just started looking into some of this. But as far as this area of believing in God, higher power, nature, or spiritual,
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of those, like a lot of people feel as Christian, but don't really know what Christianity is.
Yeah.
And I have a personal theory that I haven't started getting into yet as far as there being some type of religious trauma.
Right.
Whether their parents divorced, or they have one way in church. I mean, the biggest things are hypocrisy. So there's a lot of, I just feel like there's a lot of pain and trauma that way that causes people as they get older to not change the morality anymore. They
Right.
accept things as morality, maybe accept more or less, but their overall acceptance of what's real because of what they witnessed versus what they heard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anyway, what's your thought on that? I mean, does that sound,
Absolutely.
do you
Yeah.
find that to be true in a lot of these cases with this?
Well, it just depends. I mean, when I'm talking to people, I do get to hear about their upbringing, and sometimes they're raised, in a Christian home, and sometimes not. Um, but what I often find is that people who say they're Christian, as I get to talk with them, um, that might not necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. And so I have to, even if I see in their chart or hear them say, I'm Christian, I'm inquiring about what that means for them, what that looks like for them. How is that helping them? Um, is there a piece of that that is hindering their recovery right now? And
You just identify as that because that's what they were told to identify.
right, it can be a cultural thing too, absolutely. Um, And I encounter a lot of people who are struggling with what I would say is maybe some bad theology that are keeping them from either reaching out to God or living in the abundant life that God has for them because of feeling like God has abandoned them and left them. And they can't understand where God is in all of this. And so sometimes there's very real spiritual struggles and reasons why someone is stuck and having a hard time wanting to identify with maybe their religion that they once held deep. Um, yeah. Okay. So, types of care at Rogers, like we do one-on-one visits, we lead spirituality discussion groups, we facilitate like clergy visits or faith specific. Like if someone says, you know, I'm Catholic and I need Catholic communion or want that, you know, we have people on the outside that we work with that we can bring in so that the people's religious and spiritual needs are met within reason. So by law, we have to do religious accommodation. And so, you know, we're looking for that. We're also just looking for generally how we can support people. Um, I think that the spiritual themes that we address a lot, which is interesting, is, and they're learning in their therapy about radical acceptance, but learning to accept that they're here, they're in this position, and that there's nothing they can do to change the past, right? They can keep fighting against the reality of what's happening, or they can accept it, acknowledge it, and start to move forward. So we do a lot of acceptance work. You know, some people are very caught, they're living in the past, they can't get out of the past. Um, Talk a lot about transformation and the process for change and healing, compassion and self compassion, learning about and empowering them to explore their spiritual resources, their spiritual practices, and ways of coping. So sometimes people come in with practices that used to be important to them, but because of their illness, they haven't been able to do, whether that's go to church, read their Bible, pray, whatever that might be. So we can help to reconnect them with those things if that's important to them, and even provide accommodations for them to be able to like live stream their church if they want, to get, you know, Bible or other sort of devotional or whatever that they might need. Um, Oftentimes it's just talking about God and where is God in all of this. A lot of people, like I mentioned, have forgiveness issues that is keeping them stuck emotionally, um, self-worth and belonging, um, meaning and direction. Like, what is going on? What, like, is this all meaningless? Is there a purpose behind it? Like, what is happening, right? They're asking those questions and then exploring and assisting with spiritual struggles. So, for example, why isn't God curing me? You know, where is God in all of this? And so, unpacking that a bit, looking into their questions. Well, where would we find those answers? Looking in the Bible. Okay, so what does the Bible say? You know, so we get to explore and learn depending on what they want to talk about.
Are you able to encourage them to, if they want to look at the Bible, like, you know, giving them that type of an option as well?
It depends. So like if they want to look at it, if they say they're Christian, we're talking about the Bible. Um, but legally, I have a job to ensure like they're a vulnerable adult in the hospital, and so my role as a chaplain isn't to proselytize. But my personal calling is to shine the light of Jesus in their room and in their life. And so that starts for me with that relationship and caring for them as a person who is sick and wounded and needing care. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Mhm. There's a lot of conversations about that. Blaming God. Where is God? Why isn't He helping me? Or feeling like God is punishing them in some way. And so, I mean, there's a number of different ways that we can look into that, but often I'll want to know more about their story and, you know, more about their theology, where is this coming from, you know? Um, and yeah, we can look at scripture, especially if they're a Christian and wanting to look at what the Bible says about what God's role is in this. And, you know, I mean, just from my own personal study, it's interesting to note um, that, all of well, 11 of the 12 disciples were martyred. And it was just John that, was exiled and died, likely of natural causes or whatever, right? But like in the Bible, there isn't evidence that promises like a problem-free life.
Oh, no, it was very, Jesus was very clear.
Right.
He says you're gonna have trouble.
But if
But he's
someone,
gonna help you through the trouble.
right, but if someone grew up hearing that theology in their church, that God wants you to be, healthy, wealthy, and whatever, it's going to be really hard then to make sense of where God is in all of this. And so it's something that isn't going to be resolved in probably a 20-minute visit, right?
But can you, yourself, I know you're bound under the law on things. But if that, I know you mentioned that if, say, they wanted, a Catholic priest to come in, you could arrange that.
Yeah.
So that could be arranged if, you can't go into it, but, there's somebody that, if you want somebody else to come, they could come as a visitor, correct?
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I just got the sign that we need to wrap this up. So thank you guys for coming. Do you want me to play the video? This is a testimonial from someone who went to treatment at Rogers.
Got a little food to eat, a few snacks. My name is Paul Schomer, and I'm a member of the U.S. Biathlon team. Never would have thought I'd have this opportunity to be able to do something as obscure and cool as biathlon, but here I am. Biathlon is a sport that combines the sports of cross-country skiing and rifle marksmanship. When I graduated in 2015, I made the decision to start competing in biathlon full time, and ever since then I've been competing as a biathlete. A lot of people always ask me, oh, are you on some sort of special diet? And I'm like, the only special diet I'm on is you eat a lot. I don't know, it's kind of weird for me to talk about my relationship with food because it is so vastly different now than it was when I was 13. Preceding my freshman year of high school, I started restricting my diet, started exercising more, started losing weight. Unbeknownst to me, because I didn't really notice it myself, because I was like trapped in an addiction, but my family started to notice the physical signs. It was recognized that I had developed an eating disorder, and I didn't really know what that meant at that point. I didn't know how I got from that point. It was kind of a scary moment when I kind of realized where I was and I didn't know how I had gotten there. At first, I thought I could maybe fix it on my own. I think that's a lot of people's hope and desire at the beginning to like try and fix it before anybody else like really knows what was going on. But I just didn't have that ability at that time. Finally, after another summer of kind of just manipulating my way through therapy and trying to do it on my own and outpatient, my doctors finally said, enough is enough. You need to go to an inpatient facility at Rogers. Nobody can do it for you. Nobody can overcome your eating disorder other than you. It takes time. It takes hard work. It takes an effort and an honesty with yourself to say, I want to beat this, and I'm going to do everything I can in my power to do it. It's great to have all the materials to build a house, but it's really hard to do it without the tools. And I think that's what Rogers does, is it gives you those tools to be able to build that, to overcome in a way that it lasts, it works, and it can last a lifetime. I was thinking about myself when I was at Rogers, and the fact that when I was at Rogers, I didn't know what biathlon was. And here I am now, and this is my full-time career. The kid at Rogers would have never thought there would have been a possibility to go to a camp with the national team, to be on the national team, to compete in the pre-Olympic World Cup, to compete in the World Cup at all, or even have an opportunity to be that close. It's kind of cool. There's nothing special about me. There's nothing that differentiates me between the next person who's here at treatment. I think that's really awesome to think that everyone can do it. Anybody can beat it. And I think it's just really cool to be able to come back and tell people that there's hope.
Thank you, guys. This was wonderful. I appreciate your questions and feedback and the conversation. Thank you. I am learning, y'all. Yes.